Welcome back. You're watching The Big Story. Tonight, we take a look at the tax burden on Kenyans, even as the conversation on the 16% VAT imposed on petroleum products continue. In studio, I am joined by Godfrey Osotsi, nominated Member of Parliament, together with Ken Gishinga, the Chief Economist at Mentoria Consulting. Gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. I will just take it back to Godfrey Osotsi. You've explained the procedure that you think the executive has been a big letdown on this particular issue. But as a Member of Parliament, do you think the legislators who are voted in by Kenyans, nominated by political parties like yourself, have played their role in terms of protecting the common mwananchi from such things?
Well, the parliamentarians did their bit. We suspended the application of the 16% VAT on petroleum product for another 2 years. And one would ask, why suspension and not abolishing? It's because we are in a situation where the government has made commitments to IMF that they will have to charge VAT on petroleum products so that they can benefit from the standby loan facility from IMF. So the parliamentarian did their bit. Given the time that the bill was brought before them, as I said, it was brought just last week towards the tail end of August. Ideally, should have been brought in July. And now we had to do what we had to do to save the many suffering Kenyans who are suffering because of the heavy taxation that the government has imposed on. But what is important is to ask ourselves, why are we in this situation? Where did the rain start beating us? I think the key thing here is for us to relook at the bigger issue of debt management. As you have said, we are talking about a debt level of about 5.1 trillion Kenya shillings. If you recall, when Jubilee government came in power, that is in 2014, the debt level was almost half of what it is now. And you remember the debt level to the GDP was about slightly about 40%. Yeah. But now we are talking about 59%. Why are we in this position? It's because we have overborrowed locally and in the foreign environment. And even if you look at the debt levels locally, that is unsustainable. We are talking about 2.4 trillion shillings debt that has been borrowed in the domestic market. Yeah. What that means is that government is competing with normal wananchi and the private sector to borrow money from commercial bank and other financial institutions. Okay. And that really makes it difficult for the private sector and the Kenyans to access credit. And that's why it's difficult for people to get credit to run small businesses and do all that. Okay. Now, in the foreign market, there has been a steady increase in bilateral loans as opposed to multilateral loans. And we know that bilateral loans are risky and are expensive. So the government appetite for loan and usage of this loan, misuse of this loan is what has put us into this situation, because we have to raise money to pay debts. Yes. And taking it just back to the role that parliamentarians have played or lawmakers have played throughout this particular issue, the 2018-2019 budget was read just the other day. And the reason why lawmakers are being accused of being insincere is these are not questions that were raised when you passed, as lawmakers, the budget 2018-2019. You're coming out now to cry together with Kenyans, the common mwananchi, from the list income earners who are going to suffer the most because, of course, of prices of kerosene and whatnot. I mean, why didn't we see such conversations come up even on the floor of the House when the budget was being passed? In Parliament, we have a committee called the Budget and Appropriation Committee.
Yes, we do.
This is a committee that handles all matter budget, and they handle the cycle of budget. And the cycle of budget runs from August to June of the following year. And I was talking to some of the members, and they said that that issue, they raise it with the relevant institution, the Treasury. What I'm trying to say is that the finance bill is a product of the executive, because under Article 114 of the Constitution, the finance bill falls under what we call a money bill. A money bill is generally those bills that have money effect in them. And this particular one, the finance bill, is done by the Treasury and submitted to Parliament after the budget. My issue is, why didn't they submit this finance bill to Parliament for deliberation early enough? Why did they have to wait until the tail end of the financial year to bring the bill? Because ideally, in August, we should have started the next phase of the next financial year. But now we are still talking about finance bill. That's why I am trying to say that this was sinister, in the sense that maybe someone wanted us to get to a level where now he will now come and say the deadline for implementation of the 16% VAT on fuel is 31st of August. And therefore, if it's not done by 31st of August, September 1st, we are going to impose the tax because the president has not assented on the finance bill. But all the same, the question is, what was the hurry in the Treasury PS coming out to announce the start of application of that VAT on petroleum products? Because the president has not assented to it. The president can assent on it as per Article 115 of the Constitution. The president may also send it back to Parliament with the recommendation of areas that he wants amended. But Parliament is not under any obligation to follow what the president has said. The Parliament can still pass that bill as it is. And the president, under Article 115, he is still obligated to sign it into law. So we are talking about 28 days in which the president has to act if Parliament rejects his recommendation.
It's very hard to understand when you talk about the president can't do anything when Parliament decides to go a certain way, because in the recent past we've seen how lawmakers are whipped to vote for certain bills in a certain way. But let's engage Ken Gishinga quickly. Ken, you have talked about the IMF and some of the austerity measures that you think should not be put in place to ensure that we are in a safe place. But there's a question of whether we are getting solutions on how to reduce our expenditure, and especially on the wage bill.
To your point, there is need to cut back on wastage. I think everybody knows that. There's sufficient evidence to that. But I think the bigger thinking is we need to look at the bigger picture here. And what's the bigger picture is the government needs money to run its operations. There are only two ways of raising funds. Either you tax the tax base, or you borrow from local or international markets. Now, we said we do not want to go the debt way. We do not want to continue borrowing. But somehow we still need the money. And the question is, where do we get that money from? And certainly, it should not be from taxing things that the ordinary Mwananchi uses, like fuel. So the big question we need to be asking very clearly is, so what's the third way where we can raise money so we do not have to debt? And for me, it's very important that people start asking that question. Where do we get that money so we do not have to tax the ordinary Mwananchi to a terrible state, or continue borrowing from the international markets?
Well, as an economist, where would you propose we get this money as opposed to taxing on commodities that are very valuable to Kenyans?
Well, I was waiting for you to ask that question. If you look at economic research, from whether you look at the history of economic thought, whether you want to look at the oldest economic thinkers, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, if you look at even recent thinkers, Stiglitz, Milton Friedman, the one source that they all agree on is on the land value tax. That is the most consistent way of raising value. And what do I mean by the land value tax? This is a tax that is applied on the appreciation of land. So let me give you an example. Supposedly you went to Syokimau and you bought a piece of land, bought it at 1 million shillings. Next year, it goes up, it appreciates to about 1.1 million shillings. Yeah. That piece of land has appreciated by 100,000 shillings. Why has it appreciated? It's appreciated because possibly the public works around that area have improved. Maybe the roads are better, or the piping, or the electricity. So a tax on that appreciation should go back to the public coffers. And economic history has shown that this is the most just form of taxing. This is the most fair form of taxing because of two reasons. It does not create economic inefficiencies like we saw today. A lot of fuel stations do not have fuel. There's a shortage because the suppliers are not bringing the fuel to the market. Yeah. So that's already an economic inefficiency. So we need to look at the harder questions. What are the right places that modern economies go to fairly raise tax? And you will not get a better place than the land value tax.
Can a country tax itself to prosperity?
Well, it needs to look at whether it's an appropriate tax. You do not want to tax enterprise. Any country always wants to reward, and you always want to reward hard work, reward enterprise. So the tax, the only tax, the money that the government needs to operate from needs to come from the appreciation of land, because that land has appreciated because of nothing that you've done on that piece of land, but it's because it has come because of the public works that have come around that area. So it's only fair that the public be able to pay, even if it's 1 or 2% of that appreciation, back to the coffers. And I can tell you, if you go to Denmark, if you go to Japan, if you go to the United States, go to Namibia, that is what creates stable societies.
All right. Back to Godfrey Osotsi. Some of the austerity measures that many, even economists, suggest that they think would help Kenya get out of the situation it finds itself in is reduction of expenditure and, of course, cutting down those in public service in the country, especially those elected. What are your thoughts on that? And, of course, what do you think should be some of the measures Kenya needs to put in place to balance its books?
Well, I think the very, very first thing that the government should focus on is to seal the revenue leakages. Kenya Revenue Authority, I think they need to do a lot more than what they're doing, because a lot of revenue is not collected because of administrative systems, because of lack of proper surveillance and basically collection processes. They need to do a lot more, because I am confident that about 30% of the revenue is wasted, is lost on the way. And it is very unfair for the government to tax Kenyans when they can easily get this money from the various revenue leakages. The other thing is, of course, corruption. Corruption is a major, major challenge to this country. The global report shows that Africa alone, we lose about 36 billion US dollars, between 36 billion US dollars to 69 billion US dollars as a result of corruption. And this money is money that can be used to do some of the things the government want to do, like infrastructure development. So really, two things must be done. One, KRA and those involved in tax administration must come up with strategies on how to seal the numerous revenue leakages.
Then do you agree that there's need to reduce our wage bill?
Yeah, that is one of the challenges that we are facing as a country. But essentially, it is about revenue. Where do we get money even to pay for the wage bill? We must start by dealing with the taxation systems. Where do we lose revenue as a country? A lot of places we lose revenue. We have a lot of contraband coming into the country. Recently, we were talking about the sugar issues. A lot of sugar coming into the country which is not taxed. Who is sleeping on the job? The various agencies involved in ensuring that we have controls in place to ensure that no revenue is lost. They are sleeping on their job. They need to do something so that at least we are able to get 30% of our budget from revenue leakages.
All right.
Then corruption. We have talked about loss of public money through corruption. Corruption is a serious issue. We cannot be talking about taxing Kenyans when someone is carrying 10 million to Harambee in cash. When we hear that an institution like IEBC cannot account for over 5 billion Kenya shillings during the election. I think we need to get serious on the issue of corruption. Thirdly, wastages in government. Wastages. We have a lot of wastages in government. For example, in projects. A project is budgeted for and they end up spending twice the money that was budgeted for. That is a challenge that must be addressed so that this money that is wasted can be channeled to the right causes.
All right.
Instead of overtaxing Kenyans.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight here on The Big Story. Godfrey Osotsi talking about some of the measures he thinks should be put in place. One, relook our tax collection efficiencies. Two, of course, reduce the wage bill. And, of course, he's also talking about corruption. Ken Gishinga says, we are not too badly off, but we really need to check ourselves to balance our books. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Ken Gishinga is the Chief Economist, Mentoria Consulting. Godfrey Osotsi is a nominated Member of Parliament and Secretary General of the ANC Party. This has been The Big Story. My name is Akisa Wandera. Up next, Ben Kitili with KTN Primetime News. Stay with us.